Well, here's an article. It was originally posted on Zero Hedge, but man, sometimes it seems like trying to navigate the Zero Hedge site, it's almost impossible. They've got so many ad scripts running on the left, the right, the front, the top, the bottom. My freaking goodness. Can't even navigate the damn site. So I went straight to the direct source, if you will, on this couple of these. realinvestmentadvice.com. Now, this is written by Lance Roberts. Weekend reading. He says, it's the debt, stupid. Of course. As I noted last Friday, the recently approved budget was anathema to any fiscally conservative policy. As the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget stated, Republicans in Congress laid out two visions in two budgets for our fiscal future, and today they choose the path of gimmicks, debt, and absolutely zero fiscal restraint over the one of responsibility and balance. Passing fiscally irresponsible budgets just for the sake of passing tax cuts is, well, irresponsible. Once again, elected leaders have not listened to or learned what their constituents are asking for, which is a simple adherence to the Constitution and fiscal restraint. I then followed up this past Monday with an article he wrote called Three Myths of Tax Cuts, stating the following. Tax cuts do not pay for themselves. They can't create growth, but in the amount of tenths of percentage points, not whole percentage points. And they certainly cannot fill in trillions in lost revenue. Relying on growth projections that no independent forecaster says will happen isn't the way to do a tax reform. As the chart below shows, let's pull it up. Pull it on up, pull it on up. There is zero evidence that tax cuts lead to stronger sustained rates of economic growth. The chart compares the highest tax rate levels to 5-year average GDP growth. Since Reagan passed tax reform, average economic growth rates have only gone in one direction. On Thursday, Fitch confirmed the same in their dismal report on the reality of what the effect of the tax cut would be. They said such reform would deliver a modest and temporarily spurt of growth, already reflected in growth forecasts of 2.5% for 2018. However, it will lead to wider fiscal deficits and add significantly to the U.S. government debt. As such, Fitch has revised up its medium-term debt forecast. U.S. federal debt was 77% of GDP for this fiscal year. Fitch believes the tax package will be revenue negative, even under generous assumptions about its growth impact. Under a realistic scenario of tax cuts and macro conditions, the federal deficit will reach 4% of GDP by next year, and the U.S. debt to GDP ratio would rise to 120% of GDP by 2027, which I remember talking about this just a few days ago. Tax cuts may lead to a short-lived boost to output, but Fitch believes that they will not pay for themselves or lead to a permanently higher growth rate. The cost of capital is already low, and corporate profits are elevated. In addition, the effective tax rate paid by large corporations is well below the existing statutory rate. Fitch expects U.S. economic growth to peak at 2.5% in 2018 before falling back to 2.2% in 2019. The U.S. will enter the next downturn with a general government structural deficit, subtracting the impact of the economic cycle larger than any other AAA sovereign, leaving the U.S. more exposed to a downturn than other similarly rated sovereigns. The U.S. is the most indebted AAA country, and it is running the loosest fiscal stance. Long-term debt dynamics are also more negative than those of peers, which with health and Social Security spending commitments set to rise over the next decade. Yeah, and at my job, they're still looking for a different healthcare provider. It's already time for them to basically say, here's your health options, pick one so we can, put you in with this health provider the same one we had last year. No, rates have gone up so much that we're looking for a new provider, and the girl that handles it is still looking. And she's like, hey, just to update everybody, she sent an email out today, Friday. Just to update everybody, I'm looking. Our rates are really high this time around. I'm trying to find something. I'm working on it. I haven't forgotten about everybody. So it says there is nothing good in any of these statements above and drive to the same conclusions I discussed last Monday. You can't solve a debt problem by issuing more debt. While congressional members continue campaigning that the tax plan would give it's $1,182 tax cut to most Americans and boost wages by $4,000, such has never been the case. A recent study by the Economic Policy Institute suggests the same in a recent study. Cutting corporate tax rates would do very little to boost employment generation. In fact, cutting corporate tax rates ranks as the least effective form of fiscal support for employment generation, since corporate tax cuts primarily benefit rich households, who are less likely to increase their consumption than low or middle income households when they receive tax cuts. I don't know if I buy that, to be honest with you, but whatever. This is a point I've made previously. Corporate tax rate cuts will unambiguously redistribute post-tax income regressively. The corporate income tax is a progressive tax, with the top 1% of households accounting for 47% of the corporate tax income tax. It says don't be bamboozled by the idea that tax cuts and reforms will lead to sustained economic growth. There is simply no evidence that such is the case over the long term. However, there is plenty of evidence to suggest that further costly reforms and runaway budgets will lead to an increase of the current national debt and the ongoing low-growth economy that has plagued the U.S. since the turn of the century. In other words, it's the debt stupid. In the meantime, here is your weekly or weekend reading list. And he has a couple titles down there, whatever. Several titles. I will say, though, you lower the tax rate, you make it more invitable for some of the companies that either A, have businesses overseas, manufacturing and things that could be over here in America, but the tax policy is such that they don't want to be here, right? Trump has been talking about, I want to bring all these people back. I want to make it put an incentive in place for them to either A, don't leave and go over there, or B, or both, come back. So you guys stay, and you guys who already left, come back. Right, so I get that, and that would create jobs, right? But the tax rate's got to be, reasonable for them to want to come back. And it's funny, we ship stuff overseas, they make it over in China or whatever, then they ship it back, and it's still cheaper than if they did it here in this country. So there's a problem, clearly. And as he says, it's the debt, stupid. Take care.